They framed a single mom and an autistic man. But what no one expected was how he'd respond. A town built on lies tried to bury their voices, yet his quiet strength and her unbreakable love turned accusation into awakening. Before this story ends, you'll see how truth doesn't just survive. It fights back in the most human way possible. Stay with me, because what happens next will change the way you look at silence, justice, and the kind of courage that never needs to shout. The first time the morning news mentioned her name, Elena didn't hear it. The radio was half broken, static mixing with the sound of her coffee dripping. What she did hear was her son's laughter from the living room, that bright, unfiltered joy that made even cheap furniture feel alive. It used to calm her, but lately, every small sound made her chest tighten. She didn't know why. Maybe because peace felt too fragile, like something the world always found a way to take back. By 8 o'clock, she was already late. The bus stop was cold, wind biting through her worn coat. Noah was there, standing under the small shelter, his sleeves uneven, eyes fixed on the steam of his breath. He loved patterns, watching things move in loops. "Morning," he said, voice soft but steady. She smiled, the kind of smile you use when gratitude hides exhaustion. The town still felt safe then. No one stared, no one whispered. Not yet. At the office, her reflection in the glass door surprised her. Older than she remembered, with a quiet loneliness in her eyes she hadn't invited. Inside, voices clustered like bees. Someone mentioned an empty donation account, words like missing and audit. She didn't think much of it. Why would she? She'd done everything by the book, double-checking every receipt. But the human mind, especially under pressure, fills silence with threat. A soft panic started to grow, silent and shapeless. That afternoon, the energy around her changed. Colleagues who once asked about her son now looked away mid-sentence. One even slid his chair back when she approached, pretending to search a drawer. It felt childish, but also familiar, the kind of social cruelty masked as politeness. Psychology calls it collective distancing. To her, it felt like drowning with witnesses. She smiled anyway, thinking it would pass. It didn't. In fact, it spread. By the end of the week, her supervisor requested a private talk. The room smelled faintly of lemon cleaner. Accusations were framed with gentle wording, protocol, misunderstanding, temporary review. Still, her body recognized danger before her mind did. She nodded through every line, voice small enough to fit in the space between their doubts. When she walked out, she couldn't tell if she'd been punished or merely warned. Either way, something had cracked inside her. Noah noticed before anyone else. He always did. "You seem quieter," he said one evening, setting down a cereal box like it was fragile. She wanted to tell him everything, but words felt heavy. Instead, she asked how his volunteer work was going, changing the subject. He answered earnestly, unaware that she was listening for silence, for that small pause when people lie. But Noah never lied. That made what came next even harder. Sunday brought church bells and rumors. She overheard her name near the bakery, followed by a woman's voice saying, "She looked guilty, didn't she?" Guilt, such a loaded word. It doesn't describe innocence or deceit, just what people assume between them. The human brain, desperate for narrative closure, fills the gap with whatever fits. And in a town that feeds on stories, Elena had become the story, without even saying a word. Days blurred after that. Her son asked why their neighbors stopped visiting. Elena told him people were busy, voices trembling on the edge of truth. She spent evenings pretending to tidy up, but really she was hiding, sorting mail she already read, folding laundry that didn't need folding. Noah brought her soup once. He placed it gently on the counter, avoiding eye contact, sensing her shame though she never named it. Empathy requires no explanation. When her supervisor called again, Eleanor already knew what the meeting meant. Dismissal wrapped in sympathy. They told her it wasn't personal. It never is. People say that to release their own guilt, not to comfort yours. She thanked them anyway, collected her bag, and left. Outside, snow had started to fall, each flake dissolving before it touched the ground. Ephemeral beauty, gone before you feel it. She whispered, "Figures." Noah heard her but said nothing. That night, she couldn't sleep. The house creaked like it was breathing. Every creak sounded like a question. Who would believe you? Fear does that. It makes silence louder than words. She thought of leaving, of starting over somewhere far, but her son's artwork on the fridge anchored her. Perhaps staying was its own act of resistance. Still, she felt watched, not by strangers, but by the weight of what people thought they knew. On Wednesday, a new notice appeared on her door. Printed words, unsigned. You should be ashamed. Simple. Cruel. The font too clean for something so vile. She stood there, reading it again and again, like if she understood the intention, it would hurt less. But it didn't. Shame works deeper than truth. It seeps into identity. Neuroscience says the brain remembers humiliation like physical pain. Her body agreed. Noah found out when he saw her tear the letter apart. He looked down, shoulders tense, unsure how to fix what words had broken. "They're wrong," he murmured. She nodded, though her eyes begged him not to defend her. Kindness makes cruelty sharper by contrast. He glanced at her son, who was busy drawing, blissfully unaware that innocence only protects for so long. Noah promised quietly, "I'll help." She didn't believe he could. Not yet. The next morning, something strange happened. A woman from accounting, the same one who avoided her for days, suddenly greeted her warmly at the grocery store, too warmly. Small talk about weather, her child, meaningless details. Then, mid-smile, she slipped in a question. "So what really happened with those funds?" Curiosity coated in sugar. That false friendliness made Eleanor's stomach twist. It wasn't a question, it was a test. One designed to confirm guilt. Her hands shook that night as she wrote numbers on scrap paper, trying to trace what could have gone wrong. She replayed everything, every transaction, every form, every login. Nothing made sense. The details didn't add up, but someone's plan did. That's when it dawned on her. What if this wasn't random? What if someone wanted her gone? The thought struck cold, but familiar, like a memory half remembered. She hadn't yet realized how close to the truth she was. And as the clock ticked past midnight, a single email notification blinked on her phone, from unknown. She stared at it, pulse slowing. The subject line was only 4 words long. "We know about Noah." What do you think that message meant? Tell me below in the comments. Your guess might be closer than you imagine. The message stayed open on her phone all night, its glow painting her face an eerie blue. She didn't answer it, maybe because a reply would make it real. Instead, she stared at those 4 words until dawn, feeling their weight sink deeper with every passing hour. The mind has a way of turning ambiguity into terror. Imagination builds the monsters that facts cannot confirm. By morning, she had convinced herself someone was watching Noah. The thought felt absurd, and yet utterly possible. When she next saw him, he was rearranging shelves at the community center, humming softly to himself. He noticed her at the doorway and smiled, oblivious to how pale she looked. "You didn't sleep," he said simply. She wanted to say "I'm fine," but her throat betrayed her, tightening like it always did when fear met love. She only nodded, hiding her trembling hands in her coat pockets. That's how survival begins, pretending control when everything inside you trembles. The rest of the town seemed unchanged, which almost made it worse. Teachers waved to her son, Shopkeepers greeted her politely, yet she sensed undertones in every glance. They weren't looking at her anymore. They were looking through her, searching for clues to confirm what they already believed. It's the silent version of condemnation. No words, just collective certainty. Neuroscience calls it social conformity bias. To Elena, it felt like sinking into invisibility while everyone clapped. Later that week, a local news page published a short piece. Former office employee questioned amid donation inquiry. The article offered no name, no evidence, but the photo was hers. A cropped image from last summer's charity event, her arm raised mid-wave. The comments below turned vicious quickly. Strangers dissected her smile, decided it looked deceitful, identity reduced to pixels and tone. She shut her laptop, trembling, whispering, "That's not me." But once the story exists, the truth becomes an afterthought. Noah noticed the change first. When they went for groceries, people kept whispering near the cereal aisle. One man nudged another, pointing. Noah frowned, his breathing shallow. Public scrutiny confuses him. Unspoken judgment feels like static in his mind. "Are they mad at me too?" he asked softly. Elena didn't know how to answer. She placed a hand on his arm and said, "They don't understand yet." Yet, a word thin enough to hold hope, thick enough to choke on. Their friendship became quieter after that. He still came over. He still brought small gifts. Cinnamon bread, a lost button he'd polished until it shone. But guilt began carving space between them. She wanted to protect him, not involve him. He wanted to defend her, but his directness often made things worse. One evening he said, "If I tell them it's not true, they'll believe me." She shook her head, eyes wet. "Noah, people like them don't listen. They decide." By Thursday, she received another email. This one had an attachment, a photo taken from outside her house. In it, she and Noah were sitting at the kitchen table, plates half full. Her son was visible in the background, laughing. The caption read, "You trust him too much." Cold spread through her arms as she realized this wasn't rumor anymore. Someone was feeding the fire, someone close. Fear anchored deep, heavy, and precise. But part of her, the stubborn mother part, began igniting too. She printed the email, marking every line, every timestamp. Then she went to the one person who still believed her. Mrs. Lane, the retired teacher who volunteered at the library. The old woman listened, expression unreadable, fingers tapping rhythmically on the desk. "Keep every message," she said. "They're careless when they think you're broken." Eleanor clung to that sentence, repeating it like a prayer. For the first time in weeks, she felt a shadow of direction. Days passed without new messages, but something shifted. Noah started avoiding certain places, the park, the coffee shop near his workplace, claiming people stared too long. He wasn't wrong. One afternoon, a teenager laughed and said, "There goes the hacker." Noah stopped walking, eyes darting around. He didn't understand the insult, just the derision behind it. Elena stepped between them, voice calm but sharp. "He's done nothing wrong." The boy shrugged, smirking. Cruelty, she realized, doesn't need proof. Only audience. Mrs. Lane called that night. There was something in her voice, urgency wrapped in caution. "I checked the public databases," she whispered. "The file they used to accuse you. It's been modified, recently." Elena's breath caught mid-word. Modified. Not discovered, not reviewed, but changed. That meant someone was still trying to control the story. The revelation hit her harder than any insult could. This wasn't about her anymore. It was maintenance of power masquerading as morality. She hung up and sat in silence, hearing static again, the same kind from her old radio. In psychology, they say uncertainty triggers the brain's survival mode, but repeated uncertainty builds something worse. Numbness. That's what she felt now. Numb, yet alert. When Noah knocked on her door minutes later, she didn't flinch. He said he'd been followed on his walk home. He'd noticed the same grey sedan twice. Elena's heart sank. Coincidence? Or escalation? They stayed up late, revisiting everything since the beginning. Dates, conversations, coincidences that didn't seem like coincidences anymore. When she showed him the photo email, he went quiet, eyes focused, breathing steady. "They want you scared," he said finally, "so you'll stop asking questions." She looked at him, realizing something was different this time. The tremor in his voice was gone. Underneath the surface calm, determination was forming, simple, unwavering. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. Elena turned off the lights, afraid to be seen inside her own home. Noah moved to the window and whispered, "If someone's watching, maybe it's time they see who we really are." His tone startled her, not angry, not reckless, but resolved. Somewhere between fear and faith, a line had been crossed. And without knowing it yet, both of them had just stepped into the storm they'd been running from. Elena didn't sleep that night. Even with the curtains closed, it felt like the house had eyes. Every sound became a signal. The creak of wood, the hum of the refrigerator, the buzz of a streetlight beyond the window. Fear sharpens perception, turning ordinary noises into coded messages. She sat at the kitchen table watching the clock tick past midnight, her thoughts looping in restless circles. Somewhere between anxiety and exhaustion, she decided she couldn't remain silent anymore. The next morning, the teacher met her at the library again, 3 manila folders already waiting. Inside were records that shouldn't exist, duplicates of financial statements, each one altered in subtle ways. A missing transaction here, an extra zero there. "This is intentional," said Mrs. Lane, voice low but steady. "Whoever framed you knew the system." Elena's stomach churned. She realized whoever did this hadn't simply sabotaged her. They had studied her, line by line, until perfection met cruelty. Noah sat quietly beside them, hands folded tight, eyes bouncing between the papers as if they were written in code. His brain worked differently, but sometimes that difference was an advantage. "This number repeats," he said, tracing a column. "It doesn't belong." The pattern clicked, something a neurotypical mind might overlook under stress. Mrs. Lane looked at him, astonished. "You're right." In that moment, Elena's fear shifted slightly toward awe. Maybe the person they underestimated was the one thing standing between her and destruction. They printed everything, labeling each page, but logic alone couldn't battle perception, not when the world had already made up its mind. People didn't want complexity. They wanted villains to blame. Still, clarity gave Elena energy she hadn't felt in weeks. She cleaned her small kitchen that evening, as if scrubbing away helplessness itself. Her son drew at the table again, humming, innocence reborn in sound. But when she glanced at the window, a flicker of movement outside froze her in place. A silhouette stood near the mailbox, still as stone. She waited, breath caught, expecting them to move. They didn't. The brain's survival instinct kicked in. Heart racing, muscles tightening, all senses locked onto one thing. The unknown. After a full minute, the figure turned slowly and walked away. No threat, no words, just the echo of deliberate silence. She hated how her mind filled in intentions she couldn't see. Fear, she thought, is the most creative liar. She called Noah, voice shaking. He wanted to come over immediately, but she told him not to. "They want to see us afraid," she whispered. "If we act scared, they win." Still, she couldn't shake the image. Mrs. Lane's advice replayed in her head. "They're careless when they think you're broken." Maybe it was time to make them careless. And maybe the key wasn't hiding anymore, but being seen on her own terms. The following day, Elena did something she hadn't dared before. She returned to the office building where she worked. Walking through the lobby, she felt eyes follow her, curious and conflicted. Gossipers thrive on boundaries. Crossing them denies their power. She went straight to the HR department and requested her employment file. The woman behind the desk hesitated, smiling thinly. That information is restricted during an ongoing review. Elena froze. Ongoing? The word tasted poisonous. Outside, Noah waited in the car, tapping the steering wheel in rhythmic bursts. He noticed her expression when she stepped out. "They won't give it to you," he said quietly. She nodded, voice trembling. "They're protecting someone." He thought for a moment, then asked, "What if we find what they're protecting?" The simplicity of his question carried more strength than strategy. Sometimes the mind untouched by cynicism sees paths fogged by fear. She smiled faintly. "Then we show it to the world." Over the next few days, they built their case in silence. Library visits, old bank statements, copies of previous donations. Mrs. Lane worked late, her aging hands shaking as she scanned files. Elena noticed how everyone seemed more alive when working toward something just, even when the outcome was uncertain. Righteous focus is a neurological balm. It grants purpose where despair used to live. But purpose alone doesn't protect you from retaliation. The balance between courage and recklessness thinned fast. Then one evening, as she was putting her son to bed, the phone rang. No caller ID. Against her better judgment, she answered. A man's voice, calm and almost polite, said, "Stop digging, Ms. Hayes. The people you're protecting won't protect you." Click. The line went dead. For a moment she just stood there, breathing unevenly, the hairs on her arms prickling. Fear returned, not as panic this time, but as disbelief, a kind that fuels resolve instead of paralyzing it. She didn't tell Noah that night. He was too honest, too direct. His reaction could draw the very attention they couldn't afford. But the next morning, he knew anyway. "You got a threat," he said, eyes unwavering. She froze. "How?" He pointed at her trembling fingers, the way she clutched her mug tighter than usual. Pattern recognition. "What are you going to do?" he asked. She hesitated before answering. Exactly what they don't expect. Mrs. Lane arranged a meeting with a journalist she trusted, a retired reporter who owed her a favor. They met discreetly at a small cafe on the edge of town. The journalist listened without interrupting, occasionally jotting notes, eyes narrowing at each detail. "This isn't just corruption," he finally said. "It's manipulation of perception, public narrative control." Elena didn't know what that meant in full, only that for the first time, someone outside their circle believed her. Belief, the most precious human currency. On their way home, Noah watched the traffic lights change colors, fascinated as always by repetition. "When you tell the truth," he said softly, "people listen at first, then they forget, then someone lies louder." His words cut deeper than he intended. She reached over, placing a hand on his arm. "Then we'll speak louder too." He nodded, eyes fixed on the road ahead. Somewhere deep inside, both of them felt it, the slow, tremoring start of the fight back. That night, while rain drummed against the windows, an email arrived in Mrs. Lane's inbox. She almost missed it, buried in a flood of library updates. When she opened it, her breath caught. It was another photograph, this time of the three of them leaving the cafe. But what froze her wasn't the image itself. It was the timestamp. It had been taken before their meeting even happened. Mrs. Lane printed the email, her hands trembling as the machine spat out the paper with mechanical indifference. She stared at the timestamp again, running her finger over the numbers, as if touch might alter truth. The photograph wasn't edited. Details, like reflections in the cafe window, were too precise. "How can something exist before it happens?" she muttered. The brain hates contradictions. When reality bends, reason scrambles to fill gaps. Only one explanation remained, and it terrified her. Someone had access to everything. When Elena saw the photo, She felt the air leave her lungs in a slow, uneven breath. It was as if the world had folded around her timeline. This doesn't make sense, she whispered. Noah stared at the paper silently, his expression unreadable. They know what we'll do, he said at last. The simplicity of his statement chilled her more than any threat could. Predictive. That was the word echoing in her mind. Not watching, predicting. As if someone was always 5 steps ahead. They didn't speak much after that. Fear had evolved into something more abstract, a cognitive trap. It wasn't just danger outside, it was trust breaking inside. Every action felt predetermined, every choice rehearsed. Even Mrs. Lane seemed quieter now, her natural certainty fragmented. Information moves faster than truth, she said. And whoever controls it doesn't need to lie, they just need to show you what you'll choose to believe. The sentence lingered, heavy and unresolvable. That evening, Elena found herself walking in circles around the living room, her son's drawings covering the wall like soft reminders of untouched innocence. He asked why she was so quiet lately. She said she was thinking about work, a half-truth that made her stomach twist. Childhood offers a kind of blindness adults would pay to borrow. He still believed the world fixed what was broken. She kissed his forehead and turned away before the tears could betray her exhaustion. Later, Noah texted her just 3 words: "Don't open windows." She didn't know why, but her hands obeyed before her thoughts caught up. Then she saw it. Outside, under the streetlight, a small black car idling, headlights dimmed. Her pulse spiked, that primal synchronization of adrenaline and memory. She remembered the silhouette from nights before. Same stance, same stillness. The psychological loop completed. Recognition breeding fear, fear reinforcing vigilance. Observation had become mutual. At dawn, she called Mrs. Lane again. The teacher suggested something drastic. Maybe we create noise, too much information for them to follow. Elena frowned, confused. How? By getting ahead of them, Mrs. Lane replied, by telling the story first. It sounded reckless, but also right. The human brain, when trapped in helplessness, finds healing through agency. To reclaim the narrative might mean survival. For the first time in weeks, Elena felt an ember of defiance. They met at Noah's apartment that night. His walls were covered with indexes, sticky notes, timelines, his version of order. He'd mapped hours, names, weather reports, even cafe receipts. Patterns bloomed everywhere. They think like systems, Noah said quietly. I think in sequences. He traced a thin red line across the wall connecting 2 dates, the same ones from the altered photo. They forged time, he whispered. Elena didn't fully understand, but she could see in his eyes he was close to something big. The next morning, their plan began. Mrs. Lane reached out to the journalist again. Release it all, she said over the phone. Not tomorrow, now. Public exposure was the only defense left. Fear might silence individuals, but curiosity amplifies faster than power expects. Within hours, partial files and documents spread online, anonymous leaks without context, just enough to ignite doubt. And doubt, neuropsychology teaches, is infection at scale. Once people start questioning, the original narrative loses control. By afternoon, local forums erupted with debates, mixed sympathies, and digital rage. Headlines turned speculative. The company issued a short statement denying all involvement, but the tone, cold, rehearsed, only fueled suspicion. For the first time, Elena wasn't the target of public certainty. She was the spark of public confusion. Watching people argue about her life from behind screens should have broken her, yet strangely, it steadied her pulse. For now, the fear belonged to someone else. But retaliation came swift and precise. That night, her internet connection died. Her phone glitched, turning on its flashlight unprompted. Emails vanished. Even Noah's computer began rebooting repeatedly, each restart erasing more data. It wasn't random, it was message. "They're silencing sources," Noah said, staring blankly at the dark monitor. "Like pulling wires from memory." His voice trembled, a rare fracture in his calm. "They can't erase people," Elena whispered back, though she wasn't sure she believed it anymore. 2 days later, the journalist called. His tone was urgent, tense. "Something's wrong," he said. "One of the files sent to me contained metadata from the future, tomorrow's date tag, from your old office server. Tell me that's a glitch." Her silence on the line was answer enough. He exhaled shakily. "Then someone's manipulating timestamps at the system level." Elena closed her eyes. Even time wouldn't protect truth now. Cause and effect had been rewritten with precision. Mrs. Lane refused to retreat. "Then we'll use their arrogance," she said. "They think prediction makes them gods. Let's remind them humans still bleed, still fight." That night, she drafted an open letter, signed with her name and years of community service. She told the town her truth, not technically, but emotionally. "We built this place on trust," she wrote. "Now trust has been bought and rearranged." In the morning, thousands had shared it. Empathy had gone viral. Elena read the letter again and again that morning. For the first time, people saw her differently. Not as a suspect, but as a mirror. They imagined themselves humiliated, cornered, and began asking questions out loud. It wasn't full vindication, but it cracked the armor of collective certainty. She could almost feel the air shifting. Hope returns quietly, disguised as disbelief, but deep down, she knew every action had consequences, and someone, somewhere, was preparing their next move. When Noah checked his email later that day, there was a single new message from an unknown address. No words, no subject line, just a video attachment named "Tomorrow." He hovered over the play button, uncertain. Elena watched over his shoulder, heart pounding. The loading bar crept forward, slow and deliberate. Then the screen flickered, and what they saw on it made Elena gasp loud enough to wake her son upstairs. The video opened with static, white noise humming like a broken lullaby. Then, slowly, an image faded into view. The same kitchen where Elena sat now, same curtains, same clock on the wall. Only one difference: she wasn't in it. Noah was. He sat at the table alone, staring straight into the camera, his hands trembling. The timestamp on the corner read "Tomorrow, 8:37 p.m. It wasn't footage from the past. It was something else, something recorded before it happened. Instinct told her to shut it off, but her body refused to move. Noah leaned closer to the screen in silence, studying his own reflection frozen in time. His jaw tightened, his lips parting slightly, as if trying to breathe through disbelief. "It's me," he whispered. "But I haven't done this yet." Neuroscience calls this temporal dissonance, the clash between perception and expectation. The brain resists it like poison, forcing denial. But there was no denial left in the room. A soft voice echoed faintly through the video. Female. Calm. "You shouldn't have interfered." The tone wasn't angry, just eerily certain. On screen, Noah responded. His future self did. "Truth doesn't belong to you." Then the recording cut to black. The silence that followed was colder than threat. Elena reached for his hand, finding it ice cold. For a long moment, neither spoke. When words returned, they came heavy and deliberate. "They're playing with reality now," she said. "Or recording who will become." Mrs. Lane arrived minutes later after Elena called, voice trembling through the receiver. She analyzed the video twice, rewinding, pausing, zooming on the timestamp. "This isn't forged. Metadata aligns perfectly," she confirmed, disbelief shadowing her tone. "They've created predictive simulations, AI sequences meant to anticipate responses." Elena felt her brain grasp for equilibrium. The story had started with gossip and cruelty. Now it was bending time itself. Fear evolved again, no longer about loss, but control. The teacher's eyes were red behind her glasses. "This isn't just intimidation," she said. "It's conditioning. They want you to believe your next move was never yours." That sentence carved deep. Elena pressed her palms to her temples. Psychology teaches that loss of agency is the fastest path to despair. When people feel predetermined, they stop resisting. She couldn't allow that. Not for her son. Not for Noah. "Then maybe we do something unpredictable," she muttered. That night, Elena couldn't sit still. Every noise made her flinch, but still she planned. Old school, paper and pen. No emails, no phones. The lights stayed off while moonlight painted lines across the table where ideas became possibilities. She wrote one phrase first. "If they know my next move, what happens when I change the story?" Sometimes survival isn't about running. It's about rewriting. Hidden deep within panic, the drive to create returns stronger than fear. By morning, she had a plan. Mrs. Lane agreed to distract anyone monitoring their activity by leaking false leads online, new discoveries that meant nothing but sounded important. Meanwhile, Elena and Noah would meet with the journalist again, but somewhere anonymous this time. A roadside diner miles outside town. Risky, but essential. "We control our narrative," she told Noah. He simply nodded. At that moment, she didn't see his fear. She saw faith. Simple, solid, anchoring. The drive was silent except for the hum of the engine. Between them sat the printed frames of the video, each one like a prophecy waiting for proof. Elena's eyes kept flicking to the clock. 7:50 p.m. Every minute nearer to the predicted moment made her heart beat harder. When they arrived, the diner glowed faintly under tired neon lights. Inside, it smelled like coffee and old music. A place too real to feel dangerous. Maybe that's why she chose it. Normal places deceive better than secrets. They sat in the last booth, waiting. The journalist was late. Elena stirred her tea without drinking it, watching the silver spoon blur through the reflection. Across from her, Noah stared out the window toward their parked car. "You think it's destiny?" he asked quietly. "That video. Maybe it's proof everything is already decided." She met his gaze, steady. "I don't believe in destiny," she said. "Just decisions." Somewhere behind that sentence, she hoped choice still meant freedom. At precisely 8:37 p.m., the diner's door creaked open. The world seemed to hold its breath. A woman walked in, not the journalist, not anyone they expected. Short blonde hair, black coat, calm face. She went straight to their booth as if she belonged there. "You should have stopped," she said softly, setting a small envelope on the table. Elena's pulse surged. Noah's hands clenched. "Who are you?" Elena demanded. The woman smiled faintly. "The one who warned you yesterday." The envelope contained a single photo, blurry grayscale, taken from an angle outside Noah's apartment. At first, it looked ordinary, but Elena's heart froze when she realized the figure in the picture wasn't her. It was Mrs. Lane, standing by Noah's door at midnight. This must be wrong," she whispered. The woman shook her head. "She's not your enemy, but someone's using her trust." Then she turned, leaving as quietly as she came. When they looked again, the parking lot was empty. Shock burned through Elena's chest. The brain processes betrayal like physical pain. It demands coherence where none exists. "She risked everything for us," she said, gripping the table. Noah looked at her with gentle clarity. "Sometimes good people are used by bad systems." His tone wasn't anger. It was heartbreak softened by understanding. Still, he looked scared. He had trusted Mrs. Lane completely. If deception reached even her, then who was left untouched? Neither of them spoke on the way back. The town lights blurred past the windshield like fading constellations. Elena's son was already asleep when they arrived, unaware of the storm waiting outside his small world. She tucked him in quietly, brushing hair from his forehead, whispering promises she wasn't sure she could keep. In the dim glow of the hallway, she felt exhaustion creep in, but beneath it, a new clarity. Fear had changed form too many times. Only action could break the loop. At nearly midnight, her phone buzzed. One unread message from Mrs. Lane. "We need to talk. Now." The timestamp froze her blood. 8:36 p.m., 1 minute before the diner encounter. The message wasn't sent after. It was sent before. And attached to it was one image. Elena's kitchen, tomorrow night, empty, lights still on, and the clock reading the same time the first video predicted. Elena's pulse quickened as she stared at the screen. The timestamp glared back at her like proof of an impossible truth. Beside her, Noah studied every pixel of the attached image with quiet dread. "Tomorrow night," he whispered. "It's showing the same hour." Logic tried to step in. Glitches, corrupted data, staged manipulation. But intuition screamed louder. The air felt thinner, heavier, as if the future itself had already taken its first breath somewhere nearby. She forwarded nothing, saved nothing. Instinct told her not to. Too many traces already existed. Instead, she printed the image and set it on the table under the kitchen lamp, the same table from the photos. It looked ordinary in the low light, faint coffee stains, a small pencil scratch her son had made. Ordinary, and yet cursed. "They're pulling us towards something," she murmured. "Some event they already know will happen." Her eyes flicked to the window. "We just don't know why." The next morning felt wrong. The sound of the kettle whistling, sunlight spilling across the linoleum. Everything too calm, too rehearsed. She watched her son eat cereal, memorizing every movement, afraid this might be the last normal morning. "You look tired," he said between spoonfuls. She smiled faintly. "Working on something." He nodded, content with simple answers. Children sense storms, but rarely name them. She envied that. In a world ruled by prediction, ignorance felt like freedom. Meanwhile, Noah spent hours reviewing metadata, tracing network logs from unknown servers. His apartment filled with scribbled notes and coffee cups, the chaos of a mind chasing patterns. "It's an algorithm," he said when Elena stopped by. "Predictive modeling using behavioral input, everything digital we do, even deleted stuff. They're using it to forecast emotional reactions, steps before we take them." He looked at her, eyes wide in panic and fascination. "They think they can write our choices, Lena." She sat down slowly, absorbing his words in silence. The thought was dizzying, technology bending psychology until freedom blurred into illusion. "Then maybe they've predicted this conversation too," she murmured, forcing a trembling smile. The line between paranoia and probability had disappeared days ago. To her, it now felt like quicksand, every act of resistance feeding deeper entrapment. Still, humans, by nature, crave contradiction. Even when the odds collapse, hope insists on one more move. That afternoon, she returned to the library to confront Mrs. Lane. The old teacher looked exhausted, circles under her eyes. "You saw the video, didn't you?" Elena asked. Silence stretched thin before the answer came. "Yes." "Did you know you were in that photo?" Mrs. Lane didn't look surprised. She simply said, "They contacted me first." The confession landed like a blow. Betrayal hurts most when laced with reason. "They said they'd ruin the boys' records at school if I didn't cooperate." Elena's throat tightened. She wanted to scream, but empathy won instead. "You were protecting him," she said softly. The teacher's eyes glistened with heartbreak. "I thought I could fix it from the inside," she whispered. "But they don't negotiate. They predict. They corner you with futures you don't want to see realized. That sentence lingered like prophecy. Elena understood too well. The manipulation was no longer rumor or threat. It was architecture, built from human fear itself. Noah waited outside in the car, sensing something heavy without needing words. When she stepped out, he looked at her through the windshield, questioning silently. "She's one of them now," Elena said through cracked lips. He didn't respond. He just turned on the headlights, casting white over the empty parking lot as they drove away. The streets blurred again, that familiar nausea of uncertainty pressing against her ribs. She realized this story was never only about framing. It was about control disguised as justice. That evening, Elena found herself lying awake with a thought that felt dangerous but pure. What if I stopped reacting altogether? If prediction thrived on behavior, maybe unpredictability meant silence. She stopped answering calls, stopped replying to emails. Noah noticed instantly. "You're disappearing," he said. "That's the point," she replied. "Neuroscience calls it perceptual deprivation. Deny the observer data, and perception collapses. But the cost was real. Every quiet second stretched like a held breath. Days passed in muted tension. They pretended life resumed. Errands, classes, dinner. But both knew they were waiting for something inevitable. The date from the message, the hour from the video, approached like a tide. Elena could feel it beneath her skin, heartbeat sinking with unseen rhythm. On the final evening, rain returned, tapping softly on windows, washing the world with gray. The house glowed dimly, the kitchen clock ticking closer to destiny. At 8:30, Noah stood by the window watching headlights pass. "We could leave," he said suddenly. "Drive west. Keep going until they can't predict anymore." She shook her head gently. "Running doesn't break patterns, it closes loops." Her son was upstairs asleep, breathing evenly, each breath a reason to stay. "If this night already exists," she said quietly, "then maybe I can change how it ends." The courage in her voice startled even herself. Time, cruel as ever, didn't pause. 8:36, the minute before everything. The house felt too still. Then, knocking. Soft, deliberate, 3 times. She froze. Noah looked at her, eyes wide, mirroring a moment both had already witnessed in the footage. History wasn't repeating. It was aligning. She took a slow breath and opened the door. No one stood outside. Only a sealed envelope on the step, soaked by rain. Her hands trembled as she lifted it, heart pounding in her ears. Inside was a photograph. The same kitchen again, this time with Elena standing behind her son, smiling through tears. On the back, one line handwritten in ink. "Your future is the only truth they can't predict." She stared at it, shivering, feeling every nerve demand interpretation. Was it a warning, a plea, or surrender? She didn't know, but she suddenly felt less afraid. Somewhere past terror, there existed clarity, and she was finally close enough to touch it. She placed the photo beside the earlier messages and looked at Noah, who was still standing, motionless. "If they wanted us silent," she said, "they wouldn't have sent this." Rain whispered against the walls like applause. He nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. "Then what do we do now?" he asked. Elena's gaze fell on the clock, 8:37 p.m., still ticking, minute unchanged, as if time itself had paused to wait for her answer. The clock hand trembled but didn't move. For a brief, haunting moment, Elena wondered if time had actually stopped, or if fear had bent perception itself. Adrenaline slows the brain's sense of duration. Every second feels stretched thin, endless. She looked at Noah, at the photograph still glistening with rainwater, and realized nothing about this was symbolic anymore. They were living inside someone else's experiment, suspended between prediction and defiance. Maybe, she whispered, they lost control when we stopped reacting. Noah ran his fingers along the photo's edge, careful not to smudge the ink. He tilted it toward the window light, reading the words again. Your future is the only truth they can't predict. Maybe it's not from them, he said, voice soft. She blinked, startled. Then who? He shrugged, shaking his head. Someone who still believes we matter. The thought was absurd and yet comforting. Human minds cling to optimism as instinct, a biochemical resistance to despair. Hers did too. The rain intensified, drumming harder against the glass. She walked to the sink, heart still pacing fast, and turned on the faucet to steady her thoughts. The water sounded normal, predictable, grounding in its repetition. She needed something tangible, something measurable. Collecting all the photographs and messages, she laid them out in order. Rumor, threat, prediction, paradox, hope. Each piece told a timeline that didn't follow time. Looking at them, she finally saw the pattern's weakness. It depended on her belief. She turned sharply toward Noah. What if the algorithm needs emotional input to keep working? He frowned, processing. You mean our fear? She nodded. Our reactions feed their data. Every movement, every heart rate spike, every decision under pressure. What if we stop feeding it? He stood still, mind spinning fast. Then it can't calculate outcomes. Elena felt a flicker of empowerment she hadn't tasted in months. Predictive control thrives on panic. Calm people are invisible to manipulation. They decided, almost simultaneously, to leave everything behind for a night. No phones, no networks, no clocks. Just the open road. Elena left a note for her son at Mrs. Lane's house before dawn, a lie disguised as love. Back soon. Don't worry. The teacher didn't understand but didn't ask. Sometimes kindness means embracing confusion. They drove for hours, north along endless highways, the world unfolding endlessly ahead. The GPS left dark. The act itself felt rebellious and deeply alive. By midday, they stopped near a deserted gas station surrounded by wheat fields. Wind bent the dry stalks into slow waves under a gray sky. Noah leaned against the car hood, breathing the quiet. Feels like nothing exists here, he said. Elena smiled faintly. Exactly the point. Silence had texture, vast, raw, untouched. For the first time, she felt free from observation. No pings, no notifications, no phantom vibrations. Just existence, undirected, unmeasured. Maybe that was what freedom was supposed to feel like. Still, fear doesn't vanish. It hibernates. By nightfall, Elena began to wonder if they'd made a mistake leaving her son behind. Guilt crept in. Guilt is memory's cruelest echo. He's safe, Noah reminded her gently. You needed distance. She nodded, though distance felt like a wound. What if they already knew we'd run? She asked. Then right now, we're breaking their map, he said simply. His confidence startled her. For someone who once struggled to find words, he suddenly carried all the clarity she needed. The next morning, a miracle of mundanity. Birdsong, weak sunlight, the rustle of a newspaper caught under a wall of wind. They had survived the night, untouched. No messages, no car tailing them. For a fleeting moment, it felt like escape had worked. Elena stretched her arms out, eyes closed. They can't follow what they can't predict, she whispered. But somewhere, deep inside, a quiet voice reminded her. Certainty is a fragile illusion. Free will often feels safest right before it's tested. When they returned to town 2 days later, something had changed. The streets were calmer, quieter. People nodded politely, but didn't whisper anymore. The scandal seemed to have faded into yesterday's noise. Even the online posts were gone. Entire threads wiped clean, replaced by new distractions. It was as if their story had been deleted from the collective memory. Relief mixed uneasily with dread. Erasure wasn't forgiveness. It was rewriting. They didn't lose, Noah muttered. They rebooted. Back home, dust had settled on the furniture. Elena picked up the old photograph one last time, staring at her own face, smiling in a future that hadn't happened. Maybe that's the point, she said quietly. Maybe this was never about evidence or lies. Maybe it was a lesson. Noah tilted his head. A lesson in what? She looked at him, eyes glassy but strong. In how easily we hand over our lives when fear asks for permission. That night, after making dinner, Elena sat by her son's bed as he slept. His breathing steadied her heartbeat, each inhale erasing a fragment of doubt. She whispered, "They tried to rewrite us, sweetheart. But all they did was remind me what matters." The words weren't meant for comfort. They were a promise to herself. Upstairs, thunder rolled faintly, distant yet familiar, like memory returning in echoes. She finally let herself cry, quietly, without breaking. Days passed, then weeks. The teacher retired early and vanished from town. The journalist published nothing, his curiosity drowned in silence. Noah started volunteering again, helping kids learn computer basics, boundaries restored, choices his own. The world went on pretending nothing had happened. But Eleanor saw patterns everywhere still, the hum of lights, subtle delays in phone signals, glances that lingered too long. Awareness doesn't fade. It adapts. Once awakened, the mind doesn't close again. One evening, she visited the community center and found Noah teaching a group of children how to code. He turned, smiling faintly when he saw her. "We made a new rule," he said, gesturing at the chalkboard. "In neat handwriting, the future only changes when kindness wins first." She laughed through tears. Somewhere in that sentence, simplicity conquered fear. The brain thrives on predictability, but the heart craves surprise born of love. For once, those two truths aligned. When she returned home that night, a single envelope waited by her door. No stamp, no name. Inside, one photo, grainy black and white, her and Noah standing at the diner months ago, laughing mid-sentence. On the back, the same handwriting as before. "See? You changed the ending." Eleanor smiled faintly, tears wetting the corners of her mouth. She set it under the lamp and whispered to the empty room. Then maybe that's all the future ever needed. Someone brave enough to rewrite it. The next morning felt unusually quiet, the kind of silence that hums beneath the surface like a hidden current. Elena woke before sunrise, watching light creep slowly across the ceiling. It wasn't fear that kept her awake this time. It was awareness. Awareness has its own gravity. Once the mind accepts that reality can be manipulated, it stops trusting coincidence. Yet something about last night's letter settled differently. For the first time, the unknown didn't feel threatening. It felt unfinished. Outside, fog clung to the streets, dimming the world's outlines. Her son still slept upstairs, his small breaths rhythmic and soft. She brewed coffee, noticing how ordinary the moment was. Steam rose, curtains swayed. Predictability returned in small domestic motions, grounding her. But under that calm, questions still pulsed like hidden veins. Who had sent that last envelope? And if someone could see so far into her timeline, why send her hope instead of another warning? Later that morning, she found Noah already at the community center, helping a child debug a small code game. His calm had deepened lately, like someone who'd walked through chaos and learned stillness on the other side. When their eyes met, she smiled. Genuine, unguarded. He raised one eyebrow playfully, as if to ask without words, "So what happens now?" She shrugged. "Maybe nothing," she said. "Maybe peace is just a story too." He chuckled, his voice light again, uninfected by tension. She stayed to help that morning, filing papers, picking up stray art supplies. The hours moved peacefully, almost deceptively so. But peace, neuroscience teaches, often feels wrong to trauma survivors. The brain expects more danger when calm arrives. Elena caught herself jumping at harmless noises, then laughing afterward. The laughter itself became medicine, proof she was still human. Yet deep inside, she sensed something unfinished, still orbiting their lives, waiting for recognition. At noon, Mrs. Lane appeared in the doorway of the center, frail, but standing. She hadn't been seen for weeks. Noah froze mid-sentence, his hands tightening around a marker. Elena walked up slowly, torn between gratitude and suspicion. "You came back," she said softly. The teacher nodded. "To say I'm sorry," she whispered. Her eyes shone with guilt and something else. Resolution. "They let me go because I stopped complying. They can track choices, not intentions. I wanted to warn you before they find another way." Elena frowned. "Another way?" Mrs. Lane reached inside her coat and handed her a flash drive wrapped in old paper. "It's their archive," she said. "Every simulation they ever ran. Thousands of lives modeled, including yours." Noah leaned closer, whispering, "Why give it to us?" The teacher smiled faintly. "Because they can't erase what's been shared." Then she walked out into the fog without another word, leaving only a faint smell of rain and paper behind her. Later that day, they gathered around a borrowed laptop at Elena's kitchen table. Noah hesitated before inserting the drive. The files appeared instantly. Dozens of names, folders, timestamps, projections of human behavior spanning years. One was labeled Elena Ma Hayes, completed. The word completed made her breath shudder. Opening it revealed charts, predictions, even transcripts of conversations she hadn't yet had. Each line felt like destiny dissected by code. Her brain fought comprehension, like running through water. "They built versions of us," she whispered. Noah scrolled further. "It's machine learning, fed by surveillance data," he said softly. "Every small act, texts, purchases, searches, they used it to build predictive selves." He looked at her with quiet heartbreak. "They tried to play God." Elena shook her head slowly. "Not God, just fearful humans with too much power." Psychology often teaches that control masks insecurity. Maybe this entire system was humanity's defense against uncertainty itself, but controlling the future only destroys its meaning. The clock ticked loudly in the kitchen. Elena closed the laptop gently. "What do we do with this?" she asked. Noah tilted his head, eyes reflecting the light from the screen. "We decide how to end our story," he said. "Maybe the truth isn't for revenge, it's for release." His voice trembled slightly, not with fear but conviction. Humans chase closure like oxygen, but sometimes survival comes from leaving answers undone. She nodded, understanding. They didn't owe the world more proof. Still, she couldn't sleep that night. The image of infinite folders haunted her dreams. Millions of futures, people unknowingly mapped in cold precision. Her subconscious turned it into a sea of mirrored faces, whispering her name in fragmented echoes. When she woke, gasping, the darkness felt almost compassionate. Fear had shape again. Boundaries. She sat up, breathing slow, reminding herself she lived outside that archive now. They couldn't predict imagination. They couldn't codify love. The next morning, she met Noah by the pier along the river. The fog was lifting, sunlight trying to pierce through. She handed him the flash drive. "You should keep it," she said. "You're better at seeing patterns." He studied it for a moment, then placed it in his pocket. "Patterns only matter when they repeat," he said softly. "We won't." A cool wind moved between them. The moment didn't feel final, just clean, like a pause that no longer hurt. Weeks slipped into months. The media cycle forgot them again. the world onto new scandals, new heroes. Elena returned to work, different job, smaller space, better hours. Noah kept teaching, each day steady and simple. Sometimes they'd meet for coffee and watch people pass by, strangers rushing through lives unaware of invisible systems shaping them. They talked less about the past, more about her son's drawings, his new love for astronomy, a child forever looking upward while gravity tugged below. Late one evening, the boy called her over to his window. "Mom," he said, pointing at the sky, "that star looks new." She leaned beside him, smiling. "Maybe it was always there," she said. "We just weren't looking." His hand slipped into hers, small and trusting. For once, she didn't look for patterns, signs, or predictions. Just light, unmeasured, unexplained, real. Some truths don't need certainty. They need witnesses. The next morning, she found an envelope beneath her door, blank as always. Inside was one photograph, her son pointing at the same star, taken from outside the house. But on the back, written faintly in the familiar handwriting, was only one sentence. Prediction failed. Future secured. Elena smiled through tears, placing the photo on her wall. For the first time, she believed it. That night, thunder rolled softly beyond the horizon. Elena lay awake, listening to the distant rumble as her son slept beside her. There was peace now, or at least something similar. Quiet space inside her thoughts that hadn't existed for months. Yet peace, she realized, isn't the absence of danger. It's surviving alongside what once terrified you. She turned toward the window, watching shadows slide across the glass. For the first time, the dark didn't feel like an enemy. It felt earned. At dawn, she walked to the riverbank where fog drifted low, soft as breath. The wind carried the smell of wet earth. She stood there barefoot, the cold biting her skin, grounding her to the present. Neuroscience says repetition rewires pain. The ritual of returning to the same place, the same reflective stillness, allows fear to dissolve through memory integration. She didn't think of science, though. She just felt the quiet. The water rippled, as if nodding back in understanding. Later that morning, Noah arrived with 2 paper cups of coffee. "You still come here?" he asked, smiling as if he already knew the answer. She shrugged. "It helps me remember what's real." They stood side by side, sipping slowly. "Funny," he said. "All the programs tried to predict our next moves, but none of them ever guessed we'd choose stillness." She smiled faintly. "Maybe chaos gets confused when we stop running." The line hung between them, half joke, half revelation. Back in town, life carried on with quiet amnesia. The gossip that once burned through everyone's days had vanished, replaced by new distractions. The human brain, driven by novelty bias, always wants fresh stimulation. People forget even their own cruelty when the world offers easier outrage somewhere else. Elena didn't hate them anymore. Hatred felt irrelevant. What mattered was the space inside herself where compassion had grown out of grief. One evening, Mrs. Lane called unexpectedly. Her voice trembled, but not from fear. Time had softened her edges. "I wanted you to know," she said. "The company was investigated. Quietly. Someone inside exposed them." Elena felt something like relief blooming slow. "What happens now?" she asked. "They'll dissolve it, rename it, rebuild it," the teacher answered. "But maybe truth got in first this time." Humans rarely destroy systems. They infect them with conscience instead. Sometimes that's revolution enough. After that call, Elena visited the library again. Dust floated thick in golden light. She sat where Mrs. Lane used to sit, running her fingers over the worn desk. Books lined the walls, hundreds of versions of truth bound in fragile paper. She thought about how language, like data, shaped perception. And yet, anyone who reads knows. The same story shifts inside different hearts. Predict that, she thought, smiling quietly to herself as sunlight pooled near her hands. That night, a sudden idea came to her. She took out an old notebook and began writing, not reports, not defenses, but a story. Her story, told through warmth instead of fear. Every detail shaped like healing. Noah's quiet strength, her son's laughter, even the pain that made her remember who she was. The act felt sacred. The brain rewards creation with dopamine. Hope, it turns out, is a neurochemical event as much as an emotion. Each page made her lighter. Noah read her words the next day. "You'll share this?" he asked. She hesitated. "Someday, maybe. If stories can protect as much as expose." He closed the notebook gently. Then this one already did. His faith in her startled her, that same unwavering tenderness she'd once mistaken for naivety. But maybe sensitivity wasn't weakness. It was armor for souls that refused to harden. She suddenly understood why her son trusted him so easily. His silence was honesty translated into kindness. Weeks blurred together again, but the silence had texture now, peace layered with purpose. Elena spent afternoons teaching part-time classes about community outreach. She told students, "Suspicion kills empathy faster than hate. Question systems, not souls." The phrase spread quietly, echoed online, outliving her lessons. She didn't plan it that way. Some messages weren't meant to echo. They simply refused to fade. Humans remember what heals them, even if they forget where it came from. One afternoon, her son came home holding a small envelope he'd found in the mailbox. Her pulse jumped, old reflexes returning uninvited. But inside was only a folded paper with a childish drawing. A house surrounded by stars. Scrawled words beneath said, "The future is watching, and it's smiling." No address, no sender. She traced the crooked lines, laughing softly. "Maybe someone out there thinks we did okay," she murmured. "Maybe someone out there still believes." That evening she found Noah at the center again, guiding children through a coding puzzle. He noticed her at the door, grin half hidden. "We're building something new," he said. "A program that makes no predictions, just reacts with kindness." The irony made her chuckle. He shrugged. "If machines can learn cruelty, maybe they can learn care." Humanity, after all, was still teaching its children, digital or flesh, how to choose compassion over control. When she walked home later, streetlights flickered overhead, like cautious stars. She thought about every version of herself the system had once predicted. Guilty, defeated, erased. None of them existed. She was still walking, choosing, defying probabilities just by breathing. Neural pathways forged in trauma rewire through movement. Its biology and symbolism combined. Each step was repair, each breath, rebellion. "They can predict patterns," she whispered, "but they'll never predict faith." The house greeted her with warmth. Photographs lined the shelf, one different from the others. Noah, her son, and her under the soft light of the diner, their laughter frozen mid-moment. It had arrived days ago in an unmarked envelope. She'd stopped questioning how. Instead, she took comfort in the possibility that even unseen observers sometimes root for survivors. Faith doesn't always need proof. It only needs witnesses brave enough to notice light after darkness. Later, as midnight came and the house fell silent again, the clock on the wall ticked forward unhurriedly, proof of time still obeying ordinary rules. Elena smiled faintly, brushing her fingers across the small drawing on the table. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled again, accompanied by rain's soft applause. The world kept moving, unplanned, unmeasured. And for the first time, she let it, exactly as it was meant to be. Elena woke before sunrise, enveloped by the gentle murmur of rain against the windows. The sound felt like a memory returning, the same kind of rhythmic calm she used to crave during sleepless nights filled with fear. Now, it was different. The rain wasn't a reminder of what she'd lost. It was proof that life continued. Ordinary, and miraculous in its own quiet rhythm. She glanced at the clock. 7:30. The world no longer seemed to chase her. Time, for once, walked beside her instead of ahead. She took a slow breath, tasting stillness like a strange new luxury. Downstairs, her son was already awake, sitting cross-legged on the floor with a jar of crayons. "I'm drawing the river," he said, pointing at the swirl of blues and greens spread across the paper. "It's where you and Noah first saved the truth." She smiled faintly, surprised he remembered. "We didn't save anything," she said softly. "We just stopped letting fear win." He didn't answer, too focused on coloring the waves. Sometimes wisdom hides better in children than in philosophers. She watched him, thinking maybe he'd grow up never fully knowing the storm she survived. And that was the point. When she stepped onto the porch, the air felt clean, alive. Damp earth scented the morning, the same fragrance that used to carry her grief years ago. Today it smelled like a promise instead. Across the street, the neighborhood stirred slowly, curtains opening, coffee pots clinking, the mundane symphony of a world blissfully unaware. It struck her how invisible truth can become once justice settles quietly. There would be no articles, no apologies, no revenge. Just the subtle justice of endurance. And for the first time she realized she could live with that. Later that morning she met Noah by the riverbank. He stood there the same way he always did, still anchored, as if the wind answered to him. He turned when he heard her footsteps, smiling. "You came," he said, like it was both statement and relief. "Wouldn't miss it," she replied. The water was higher now from the rain, flowing smooth but strong. "Do you ever think it's strange," he asked, "how people can heal in the same place they were once broken?" She nodded slowly. "Maybe that's how the world forgives us, by letting beauty return to the scene of pain." They stood in silence, the wind wrapping their words in gentleness. Noah reached into his pocket and handed her a folded sheet of paper. "Remember the archive?" he said. "I deleted it." She looked at him, startled. "All of it?" He nodded. "Every file, every backup, gone." She felt her heartbeat quicken, torn between fear and awe. "What if that was dangerous?" she whispered. "What if they come back?" He shrugged, eyes calm. "Then they'll find nothing to control. Sometimes the only way to end a story is to burn the pages." The simplicity of it held more weight than logic ever could. He understood something she'd only begun to grasp. Liberation isn't safety, it's choice without expectation. They walked back to town after that. The streets gleamed, washed clean by the rain, and even the air felt lighter. People greeted them without glances of hesitation, without that faint shadow of suspicion that used to follow her everywhere. Months ago she might have doubted their sincerity, but now she saw it differently. Maybe forgiveness isn't an offering but a byproduct, not something you ask for, only something that quietly happens when both sides move forward. "You ever notice," Noah said, "how memories fade as soon as we're brave enough to look at them without fear?" She smiled softly. "Maybe that's healing, not forgetting." That afternoon, Elena returned to the community center to help repaint the walls. The color they chose was sky blue, Noah's suggestion. "Because hope always looks better against blue," he'd joked. She dipped the roller into paint, streaking long lines that covered every scratch, every faded mark from years past. The process felt cleansing, almost symbolic. With each stroke, she erased the quiet fingerprints of sorrow, replacing them with something steady, calm, alive. Around her, laughter echoed. Neighbors, kids, noise. A kind of music that didn't need melody. During a break, she stepped outside for air. The sun had emerged fully, glinting off puddles like fragments of sky scattered across the concrete. She noticed a woman sitting on a nearby bench, reading a newspaper. When their eyes met, The woman smiled faintly. Recognition flickered, familiar but kind. Elena realized it was one of her former co-workers, one who used to avoid her during the worst days. The woman raised her cup in greeting. It wasn't apology, it was acknowledgement. And that was enough. Sometimes closure lives in small gestures, easy to miss unless you've learned to see it. In the evening, Elena cooked dinner slowly, letting every aroma linger like peace settling into the corners of her home. Her son hummed as he set the table, a half-tune of joy without reason. When Noah joined them later, the air filled with warmth, not the dramatic kind, but the steady security of shared silence. Between them sat not secrets, but comfort. After so many storms, this simplicity felt revolutionary. "It's strange, isn't it?" she said. "How happiness feels heavier than sadness once it's real." Noah smiled. "That's because it asks you to trust it." She nodded, silently agreeing. After dinner, the three of them watched the rain begin again through the window. The world outside shimmered in watery reflection, each drop falling like punctuation on a story that refused to end in tragedy. In that soft light, Elena noticed the small drawing her son had pinned to the fridge. Her, Noah, and him beneath an enormous blue sky, standing by the river. Crayon stars surrounded them. Above the picture, in his messy handwriting, he'd written, "Truth won, because we stayed kind." Her eyes stung at the simple grace of it. Hours passed, the rain thickened, and then thunder murmured once more. She tucked her son into bed, smoothing the blanket around him as he whispered, "Mom, were they real?" She paused. "Who, baby?" "The people from before, the ones who watched us." She thought for a moment. "Maybe," she said softly. "Maybe they were real, but we stopped being their story." He smiled sleepily. "Good." The innocence of that word struck through her, sharper than any truth ever had. In the quiet that followed, she sat by the window again, watching water trace paths on the glass. Each line blurred what lay beyond it, just like memory, just like time. But she didn't try to look through the distortion anymore. She let it exist. Healing, she thought, is learning to live with what you can't see clearly, and finding peace in the blur. Outside, the storm hummed steadily, steady as pulse, steady as life itself. Somewhere deep within her, something finally exhaled. The following morning, she woke to sunlight cutting through thin clouds. The air had the scent of renewal, wet leaves, warm earth, the faint sweetness of something growing again. On the porch, an envelope lay, like it always did at the end of things. Her hands didn't tremble when she picked it up this time. Inside was a single photograph, her son standing by the river at dawn, the same spot where it all began. On the back, written in uneven script, 3 words glowed like a benediction. "Cycle complete. Begin." She stood there for a long time, watching the world unfurl in gold around her. Somewhere nearby, church bells rang faintly, though she couldn't tell from where. It didn't matter. In that moment, everything belonged. Every wound, every fear, every undesigned miracle. The past had finally stopped repeating. And as she turned toward the open road shimmering in morning light, Elena smiled with quiet certainty. The future wasn't waiting for her. It was already hers to choose. Before we end this story, take a moment to think about what Elena and Noah went through. How easy it is for good, ordinary people to be misunderstood, judged, or silenced by a world that believes rumors faster than truth. Maybe you felt that too, blamed for something you didn't do, or unseen when all you wanted was peace. If this story moved you, leave a comment below and tell me what part spoke to your heart. Don't forget to like the video, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel, because here, every story reminds you that kindness still matters.